The other day in bed, Emily asked me,
If we couldn't have any more kids, would you be open to adopting?
and to be honest, this is a question I've been asking myself for the past couple of years. In one of our first episodes of I'm Listening, I interviewed my friend Bibi, who shared her story of having an abortion at the age of 15. Towards the end of our conversation, one of the take-home questions was, why don't more Christians put their money where their mouth is? That is to say, if you actually hold a pro-life position, why not go the extra mile and open up your home to a child in need? And so ever since I've had that conversation, stories of adoption have stood out to me in a way that they didn't before I had that talk. And so when my friend Heather told me that not too long ago she was faced with this choice completely unexpectedly, my ears perked up. This is my conversation on adoption with my friend Heather Torres.
And I'm so grateful you're even just bringing this conversation, because I think a lot of times too, as Christians, especially walking through adoption, adoption is birthed from brokenness. And so even just the fact that having conversations around broken situations, unresolved traumas, it's difficult, like it's hard. And I think that's why there is this perception that it's not happening, but it is. It's happening in secret all the time. You know, there are Christians out there that are helping and doing those things when it comes to adoption. Our faith, what was your actual question? I just wanted to bring that point up.
No, there's not a specific question.
Yeah.
Just curious about how faith for you influences how you think about this whole thing.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, we're adopted sons and daughters of Christ. Like we ourselves in Christ are adopted. And so for me, when I think about, you know, we have been commissioned to help the widows and orphans. And that is a huge call on the Christian community. And it was very biblical back when that call was given, because there were a lot of there was a lot of widows and orphans at that time. There still are a lot of widows and orphans. And a lot of times too, adoption is only seen as this thing that Americans do, where they go over to another country and
kind of predatory in nature.
Yes, it's like they bring these children back and they give them these elaborate lives. And adoption happens in so many ways. Ours is a very unique way that we came into. And we say adoption because we have adopted him into our family. It actually is a custody agreement that we have. And so there's many ways to even do adoption. But for us specifically, we felt like if we have been called to help and serve, we will do that in any capacity God calls us to. And for us, as my husband and I, Isaiah, when I was 18, I went to the hospital. I was having traumatic pain, and it was diagnosed that I had endometriosis, which is a condition that doesn't allow you to actually keep babies. You can get pregnant, but you can't actually keep babies, because I have scar tissue on a certain part of my uterus, and this whole painful experience that's happened. And so from literally seeds were planted in me at 18 that, it's going to be hard to have babies. And so from that point on, I was like, okay. And I wasn't a Christian then. I thought, well, if it comes to it, I could just go and adopt. Like I just thought that's just an option. Later on down the line, we ended up getting pregnant and having miscarriages. We then had our daughter. We got pregnant with our daughter. And that was successful. And then after that, we got pregnant with my son. So I knew God had fulfilled promises to me, because I knew I was supposed to be a mom.
Right.
Like I knew in my knower of knowers that I was supposed to be a mom. And so I figured however that happens, I'd be excited for it. But always planted in it, my husband and I knew that adoption was a part of that process. We just kind of knew that that's how we were going to grow our family.
In your interactions with people who have gone down the adoption route, do you feel like that's a common thread? Like for me, like I've never thought of myself as being someone who adopts. And it's only actually as I read scripture that I'm like, like I feel like I should be paying attention to this, but also I don't know that that's necessarily like a calling. Like I don't feel that way per se.
Yeah.
But I am drawn to the stories. I am curious about it all. I do want to, be a part of the solution. In your experience with people who have adopted, is it generally like they know from the get-go that there's a calling?
No.
Okay.
Because it comes to each family so individual. I remember my husband and I were living up in Washington. I remember actually sitting, it was a rainy afternoon. We're sitting up at Pike's Place Market in this like upstairs coffee house, rain's outside, and we're having this conversation pre-kids. And, I had brought it up to him, like we had both known that it may be possible that I wouldn't wouldn't be able to have babies. So we were already in marriage thinking about, well, how are we going to grow our family? And I remember being in this coffee shop and I said, well, do you want, like, is there a country you'd want to adopt from? And my husband had grown up in a very dysfunctional and very traumatic experience in Southern LA. And for him, the Boys and Girls Club was his outlet. That's where he got good mentorship. That's where he learned sports. That's where he learned to become a man, really, was in that setting. And so he said, no, I wouldn't go to another country. There's kids here in America who need good people around them. And so when I think about the Christian community or people like you, who it wasn't even something you thought about yet, that doesn't mean that God's not going to call you to it at some point. And he could just be preparing you through these messages. And so many parents that I talk to through the foster system, through adoption, it wasn't something that they even really wanted to do. It's a sacrifice to go down that road.
And that's how I feel. Like, I'm curious, was the idea of adoption something that you were like, just like, oh, this is going to be great? Or like, for me, like, I think about, you just said, who knows, God might be moving us. And I was like, oh, like, I don't know. Like,
it's
that sounds
scary and unpredictable. And it comes with, what's this kid going to be like? Would I love this child like I love you just had a baby. So you have just this infatuation with your son. That's natural, right? But when it's someone else's child that you're bringing in, the honesty is you may not love that child the exact same because you didn't have them from birth. And so, there's a huge sacrifice in it. When I became a Christian, I was really interested in the foster care system. I just kept getting drawn into different volunteer opportunities, being around families who were foster families. And I had never been exposed to that before. And that really was where I felt my heart was being tugged in the direction. In America right now, there are hundreds of thousands of children who are not even just in the foster care system, but who are actually owned by the system, meaning that their parents have no parental rights anymore, and they are living in these foster homes as orphans. Even though they're in the foster care system, they are living as orphans. And there's a statistic that says that if a young boy over the age of 5 is not adopted and he's in the foster care system, if he reaches the age of 5, he will probably never be adopted. And he will go through the entire system, and at 18 he'll age out. And that could be moving from house to house. Most kids in the foster care system are in 4 or more homes. Could you imagine that? Moving to 4 different families through your life. And so I just started getting so involved in just foster care in general. And we looked into what does that look like for our family, and would we be able to have this experience? And really, for my husband and I, we decided to support foster families first. So rather than you actually having to say, like, I'm going to sign my name on the dotted line, I'm going to bring a child into my home, I'm going to do those things, you actually can just be a support to families who have decided to do that.
What does that mean? Like, you give them money, or you
no,
cook
not
them
even that.
dinner?
You can be bringing them dinner. You can become an auntie and uncle. You become just a mentor to these children. And for us, we really wanted to help children who were in their middle school and high school years, because the younger kids, people want younger kids because of just the ability,
less baggage,
exactly, less baggage, and kids just want to be loved. It is in our heart. Jesus is love. We know that we are separated from him, and when we come to Christ, we get to receive love, and that's all these kids want. And so for us, there was a foster family in our community, and we just came around them and we supported them. We became respite care. We became their godparents. We became the people who brought them to church. We became the ones who bought them shoes on their birthday, and just became family members to them and support to them in the community.
What did that experience do? And how's that different than just like, oh, like there's a kid in my local community, every once in a while we take him out to eat, or like, and you're just like a kind uncle or an auntie figure, like very informally. How was that experience different?
It really just started through making connections with the actual foster parents, and foster parents need support. I mean, when you bring a child into your home, and we'll get into adoption, but I think foster is such a very important thing to talk about, because there are so many opportunities to help and support. And a lot of churches actually have foster parents in them, and no one's supporting them. And a great way to even get involved in the foster adoption place is through just being a support. going over and hosting them for dinner, or maybe you want to be the one that babysits them, or maybe you want to just help with after school drop off and pickup. We would take the foster mother was working full time, and these children had to go to therapy 4 times a week.
Wow.
That was driving back and forth, and so we just became a car ride, so it doesn't have to be in these large, giant, sacrifice your family or your own children in that way that a lot of people think. It can be something as simple as bringing meals, helping with driving, mowing their lawn. I mean, it's so many different ways that you can be a part in the foster care system, because a village raises a child, not just a single person. And when you can put these children in good families and in good communities, that's where they start to thrive.
The very first time that I can consciously recall being exposed to the foster care concept was when I was around 18 or 19 years old. A friend of mine, somewhat out of the blue, just told me that she had officially become a foster mom, a friend of mine who was still in her early 20s. Now, I'm ashamed to admit it, but I remember distinctly how I felt about hearing this news. Rather than celebrating her courage or affirming her compassion, or at least doing the bare minimum of asking, how can I possibly help and support you? I remember thinking to myself, why in the world would you do that? Because in my mind, what she was doing was she was throwing away her life, and I was so confused. And so one of the questions for Heather was she feeling like the stigma that I was expressing was unjustified, or was there a reason for the stigma, this negative stigma around foster care and adoption?
Yeah, I think it is because of just how our society has not ostracized, but definitely pushed that segment into their own thing. Like, oh, you take care of foster kids? Man, those kids are damaged. That's hard.
Right.
Ugh, I wouldn't want to do that. And we don't bring enough light to just, they're normal kids. And yeah, some of them have some severe traumatic issues, but you can get certified if that's a route that you want to go, or you can, you can say, I can handle these things, I can't handle these things. Like for me,
Oh, so it's not just like a grab bag. You don't.
not a grab bag.
Okay.
No. And you can even say, I feel comfortable with girls within this age range who don't have sexual trauma. Maybe sexual trauma is something you don't really want to deal with because maybe it'll trigger you from maybe past experiences. So there's so many ways. But yeah, it definitely is something in our society where it's like, ugh, you're going to throw your life away. She's getting so much support around her with those children in terms of what the state will even provide, that I think it's a sacrifice, but also you may not be called to love that child forever, but you're called to love that child when you have them.
Okay, I have a question about that, because
Yeah.
Part of my mind is thinking about like, well, if I can't do it for the child's entire life, like then am I maybe perpetuating part of the problem, like this bouncing around factor? Like, am I somehow getting in the way?
No, I don't think a child can have too much love. And I think that, think back in your own life about the people that have impacted you, who may not be in your life anymore, but it was a season where it was so foundation to you learning. Maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a soccer coach, maybe it was, your mom's friend who you would go over. I don't know what that is, but they're as adults, and especially as disciples of Christ, Christ didn't stay in the same place all the time. He didn't love the same people personally at the same time, but he went to different places. And to me, I see that that's what we're called to do. If we can't do it forever, that's fine. But if you're called and there's a child in need, I think as a Christian community, we should be stepping up and surrounding that child more and more, because that's the next generation of leaders in our country. That's the next generation of disciples in the church. And so who are we if we say, what I'm doing over here is fine with my own kids, but you stay over there at an arm's length? We're called to love thy neighbor, which means no matter how old they are, no matter how long they're your neighbor, we're called to love them to a certain degree.
Even though Heather and her husband Isaiah were talking about fostering and adopting as part of their potential future, it still wouldn't prepare them for the way in which adoption would become a reality. Quite literally, and definitely unexpectedly, they received a call one night.
It was Martin Luther King Day. It was a Sunday, and our unique situation is that we actually adopted our nephew. And so we, because part of the story is his own story, I want to respect him in that and his relationship with his birth parents and those types of things. But for us, my side of the story is we were sitting on the couch and we got a phone call one day, and we had the option to say yes. And in that moment, my husband looked at me, and I knew what was happening. And we had been.
Were you answering the phone, or
he was answering?
He was
the phone.
answering
yeah,
the phone.
so he answered.
Could
the
you
phone.
overhear what was happening?
I could hear the. Yeah, I could hear the conversation. And to backtrack that, we had our son. We had our son, and we knew that we wanted to either have another baby or start the adoption process. So we had been in prayer to grow our family for about 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And that was a everyday prayer. And I knew that our family was supposed to be bigger. I knew it was supposed to be bigger. I don't know how I could tell you other than like, you just know, right? So I knew it was supposed to be bigger. We had other opportunities where people in our life said, this child needs a home, and we said, yes, we'll say yes. And luckily, that child was able to be placed with another family member and all these things.
So you've never actually like fostered a child yourself up to this point.
Right. But we had said yes twice before. There was a set of triplets who were in Oregon, and through someone who knew someone in a church and was like, I know a family who would take kids right now, which was us. Would you take them? And we were within weeks of flying up to Oregon and bringing home 3 triplets. I mean, so we had said yes before. So I felt like those were almost like our testing. Like when God says, here's children, will you take them? We said yes. And
when you say yes and then it doesn't happen, what does that do? Because I think about some friends of mine in LA area who had gone through the process of making moves to adopt a child who was about to be born, helping the mother through the pregnancy and the delivery, and pretty much like there's apparently a cutoff where the mother can choose to keep her own child, which she should have that right.
Yeah.
But part of the challenge is that this family is also helping her financially in a significant way.
Yes. And
they were kind of jaded by that experience.
Yeah.
So for you, getting the no's, what is that like? What does that do? How does that move you from your determination one way or the other?
Yeah, I think for me, probably more than my husband Isaiah, I was like, God, am I not hearing you? Like, I thought you said like this was the next thing. And then these doors keep closing, one door and then another door. And I was like, is this what I'm supposed to do? And just reading God's word, I was like, no, his promises are real. And I know that was a word that I was given. I know that he has this for our family, whether it's now or it's 10 years from now. When I look at, when Abraham, they were in their 90s. Yeah. And we think that we need to have kids by 30,
Were you thinking like it's going to happen after the kids are out of the house?
That's what I thought. I was like, well, maybe it could be, we have a lot of people in our life who have, second gen kids where their kids are getting older and surprise. And I thought, okay, well, if that's what he has for us and that's how he wants us to grow our family, I will trust in God's plan rather than trying to make my own. And when he puts those opportunities in front of us, I will just say yes, because that's what he's called me to do. So it was hard. I had to kind of like, am I not seeing this right? Am I not hearing this right? I'm also a verbal processor. So I'm not the person. But I'm also not the person that will like hold things in. I told our whole team, I told our whole family. And so then I'm like, gosh, am I a liar? Like I was walking through these things like, it was supposed to happen. I'm telling the truth through the process. And then there was a no. Now should I keep these things to myself? And I am more of in the camp of, no, I went through miscarriage alone. I don't ever want to experience that again. So I would rather have a community supporting me with the yes or the no than trying to walk that line by myself. So yeah, it's discouraging and it's hard. But when you do get the call, like we did with our son, we said yes through God's grace. And there's so much shown back in this thing. A year prior to that, we'll just go there. We just go there for all the things.
Wherever you're willing to go.
Yeah, a year prior to that, my husband actually had confessed a very huge sin where it required him to go to rehab. And and that was a gambling sin, and he's fully open with that. But with that, we had $70 in our account. So we had gone to broke basically through this sin. And luckily God has healed him. God has brought him through that. God has done so many good things, miracles on so many fronts. But right after his year of sobriety with that, we were so abundantly blessed. And we're like, God, what are you doing here? I mean, it was, oh God, what are you doing here? And to get that call and to be able to be like, yes, we can buy plane tickets right now. In this moment, we can buy same day, same hour plane tickets to fly up to the state that he was at, and to bring him home that next day was only an act of God. It was only him being able to set us up in those ways, because to be financially prepared to bring a child into your home is a real thing.
Right.
It's real.
Yeah.
Like, it costs money
and
to
it's
have
very
children.
different knowing that you got a 9-month lead time. Like, okay, time to get our finances in order.
Right. And it wasn't like we were bringing a baby or a toddler. He was 11. So we're bringing a middle schooler, and, with whatever he was already, whatever his previous experiences had been, we were just inviting that into our home. And so we had to walk through, what does that even look like? How does he acclimate into this family, because he was coming from a different situation? What does this look like? We already have children. So that's the other thing people say. Well, I don't want to adopt kids that are older than my kids, because that's going to mess up birth order, and that's going to mess with the dynamics of, a firstborn child is a firstborn child. So now you have an older child. How does that work? And but again, we just kept saying yes. Yes, God, we will do this. Yes, we will make this happen. And it took me a little while, actually, after he came home to fully accept that God had answered the prayer. And when you pray for something for so long and then it happens, you're like, wow, I didn't do this. Only God did this.
In getting to sit down with Heather and to hear her family's story, one of the things that became clear was that even though this was from her point of view, a direct answer to prayer and a personal calling from God, it didn't mean that there weren't question marks or lingering hesitations. And I think that this is important to dwell on. I think that it's fairly safe to say that in any season of life that introduces major changes like this one, that there are going to be moments for regret to creep in and for doubts to surface. Did I make the right choice, or am I perhaps going down the wrong path?
I was nervous about what he had been exposed to. So what was he going to expose to my children? I was nervous about how my children were going to accept him into it, because they are so close as siblings. We're already a weird family that we homeschool, and so we already have different dynamics. I work from home. There's just so many weird dynamics that most families don't have. And so I thought, what is this going to be like for him to come into this situation? Really, our thing too was, what was this going to be like to come into a situation with two parents? That was a big deal too, because he had been very self-sufficient very early on because of different experiences that he had had. And so, there was so many unknowns and questions. But man, he's the best kid, and he's so loving, and he's so kind. And it just affirmed to me over and over that kids just need love and structure, and someone saying, I'm here for you. I want to stick up for you. I see big things in your future. That's what kids want. That's what we want as adults. And so for me, it was so easy once he was there to we just started including him. We didn't give him stipulations like, you must call me mom or dad. He did that organically on his own. One day he just said, can I call you mom? I was like, yeah. And then I went in my room and I cried my eyes out.
I was going to ask, what did that do to you?
Yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness. But there was a lot of things, I was a part of a foster care support group. And one of the moms had posted something that I thought was so incredibly insightful, was this idea that every child, this is so weird, but it's so true in adoption. Every child, every family has their own scent, their own smell. Every child has their own smell. It's actually, it's very animalistic for us, especially as mothers.
She's not talking metaphorically.
No, literally a scent. Kids have scents. I don't know if you've been around a lot of kids, they smell, right? But that actually is a very biological thing, that you have a reaction to your own children's scent. Actually, even when babies are born, they look more like their dads than their moms. So the dads have a connection with their children early on. But every child has a biological scent. And she had posted something, and I had been thinking about this. So I was like, man, it's just different. When I'm hugging my own son or when I'm hugging my own daughter, I remember the baby smells. I remember all those things. And it's just a different connection that I have with him. And she had posted this whole article about it. And it was this idea that, that through adoption, as adoptive mothers, you actually have to develop the scent of your new child. And it's so weird, but I remember it was about 6 months in, and we were laying there because we do Snuggle Saturday where I read to the kids and all that, and he was laying on me, and it was instant. he had our scent. And I was like, whoa, God, it was so weird. But I thought, man, that is just a picture of adoption. That's how, like, he's just a part of our worlds, and so he's a part of our family, and he's my son. And I don't discredit his parents. I don't. And that's a journey that we'll walk through. We're walking through counseling. We're walking through what do those relationships look like. We're walking through the dynamics of it. But adoption is birthed through pain, and it's birthed through struggle. And so, there's a lot on that side that we will always be working through. But our job as his parents is to protect him and to help him become a good citizen in our society.
You had mentioned that the year prior to getting the phone call and going through the adoption process, that your husband was kind of in a darker spot. So I'm curious how this adoption experience either like accentuated the weak points in your marriage, or like what did it do for your marriage? I guess is what I'm asking.
It did a lot for our marriage in so many good ways. We had already been working through so many pieces in our marriage that were broken because of that, on his part and my part. To be able to not see sin is definitely, as the wife, is like, okay, my attention obviously wasn't on my husband, it was on my job. I was married to my work, which is very unhealthy, and especially as a mom, super unhealthy for your children. And having this adoption experience has just allowed us as a husband and wife to see the dynamics and the roles of that. It's helped him even step up more as a father, just because of coming from a situation where he didn't have good fatherly influences. And then now our son was coming into this family. I think by far it has strengthened our relationship, strengthened our family even more. And we expect to, in the future, say yes again.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If God calls us again, we will say yes. I will buy a bigger house to put more children in it if God wants to use us as that. And even biblically, it says we're here as parents to steward God's children, not our children. And so for us, we're like, however many kids he wants to put in front of us to steward, that is what we will say yes to.
I think that's so cool, because like the Western view of children is like, oh my goodness, like it's another mouth to feed. It's a lot more challenging. But like the biblical view of children is that children are a blessing from the Lord.
Yeah.
And I think about like, if someone will walk up to me and give me a check for $10,000, hey, I just want to bless you. Like my emotions would just be through the roof. Like, oh my goodness, like, thank you. Like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
In no world would I ever be like, no, thanks, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, no, like I don't want the blessing. But when it comes to children, like I have that emotional response. Like when people ask like, how many kids do you want? I'm like, well, I think 2.
1 for right now.
Maybe 3, but certainly not 4, because then it just feels like it's overwhelming. But why would I not want 40 grand instead of 10 grand? Like it just doesn't make sense. So like I think it's so cool the way that you're seeing this is like, no, like this is a blessing. This is an opportunity. We want to be able to step into this.
Yeah. And usually you don't get 10 kids at one time.
Yeah.
And especially,
well, you were going to get triplets at one time.
Let's go. Giddy up. I'm ready for it. We would have had good village around us helping with that. And I would have been not sleeping and drinking a lot of coffee. But that's fine. They grow up. I think that's the thing about kids that we just don't really see, especially when you have younger kids. And a lot of younger, like you have a 4-month-old. I would not expect you right now to be thinking about adoption. You are in survival of the first year mode, right? And so even that is like, God's not going to open that door for you probably right now. He may. But back to what you said about this idea of, kids think, or parents think it's another mouth to feed. It's another kid to put through college. It's another,
thankfully college is kind of dying now.
Exactly.
So that's
it's either,
just subscribe to their channel.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. It's either more testosterone or more, more beds or more whatever. Gosh, isn't God our provider?
Yeah. Yeah.
If he's going to provide the blessing, he's going to provide the way through it. And so for me, I think if he gives us 10 kids, that's insane. In my mind, I'm like 10 kids, but I'm like, he will provide us through that. And so if our dependence is on God fully, if we say, I've given my life to Christ, my full life to Christ, that means my finances, that means my ability to say how big my family is, that means my marriage, that means my children that he gives me or the children he puts into my life. It means all of it. He doesn't say only half commit to me. He says, put your faith in me. And that means all of it. And
Yeah.
so that to me also goes into your family and your family size and your family structure, or how many kids are coming into your home. One thing we said was we want to be the house that all the kids come to.
Yeah.
We want to be that house because we want to help the children that don't have that don't see a mom and dad hug and kiss each other, that don't see an auntie and uncle in the house all the time. We want to be that lively, fun house because that's a picture of God's family.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think if he provides us with 2 or 5 or 10, he'll provide a way to make it happen. And every kid doesn't need their own room.
Yeah.
And every kid
I
doesn't
noticed
need
that. All three in the same room.
All 3 in the same room. By
And
their
you have
choice.
multiple rooms in the house.
We do. Yeah. One, because I could be a weird parent, but it's just me. Even when you get married, you are serving others, you're sharing with others. So I'm not really sure where this idea, actually in a lot of other cultures, it is very weird for children to have their own room.
Well, I mean, I think about my grandparents. They describe what life was like in the Philippines, where
Right.
they're like 4 kids. Everyone's in the same
Same room.
because there's only one room,
Right.
And there's only one bed.
That's it.
That's all you have.
Exactly. And when we think about the breakdown of what's happened in families, a lot of it is because we are giving kids too much autonomy and too much of them being alone,
Right.
that they don't want to serve others.
Yeah.
They don't want to be around others. And it was funny, this last week, we were, we call it trying on houses for size. We had a big house and we did not like it. And we downsized, and you saw, I mean, it's a very humble home. It's 3 bedrooms and, a kitchen and a living room, and it's all within one little, compact 1,500 square feet. And we went to this Airbnb that was 5 bedrooms, upstairs, downstairs, pool, game room, the whole thing, right? We didn't like it. Our kids, the first night, were like, we get our own rooms.
And then
The
they missed
first
everyone.
night, they were in the same room.
Oh, I
Because
love that.
to them, it's normal. Now, they each have their own space. The oldest has the top bunk. My
So-
daughter has the middle.
and she
She's
has
got
curtains. I saw that.
around
Yeah.
it, right? And when you even think about tiny living, families of 6 and 7 are living in motorhomes, traveling the country. Families,
We're in our van.
You're in your van. Families live in apartments. I mean, we are so blessed in America to think that every child needs their own room. That's
Yeah.
think about what you could be doing. And I'm not judging, but I'm just saying, to us, we felt like when they move out, they can have their own place. When they make, that's fine. And every year we evaluate it. We ask our daughter every time, because she is the only daughter and she's moving into teen years. Do you want your own space? Yes or no? And she's like, no, I'm fine. And the boys too. Do you guys want your own? Do you want to own boys' room? No, we're fine, because we only are in the bedrooms to sleep. Because
everywhere else you're hanging out.
everywhere else we're all just hanging out together.
I love that. My experience on the internet creating content is oftentimes that the least helpful voices come from like the church community. Someone was talking to me like, oh, when I was starting to be a pastor, they didn't warn me about sheep bite. It's like, yeah, that's a very real thing. And I'm curious,
Yeah.
is that also true in the world of adoption, where it's actually people of faith who have been given the commission to take care of, the widows and the orphans and the fill in the blank, who maybe are more prone to misunderstand?
Definitely. And I don't think, I think it's just because it's not in front of us like it is in other countries. You don't just see orphans sitting on the street in America like you do in other countries. And it's like, oh, let's go there. Let's help the widows and orphans. So I think it's an uneducation. So and an ignorance. It's just that they just don't know. And especially because of even the ability to ask questions. Who are you going to ask? Luckily you were exposed to someone who has fostering, or me, who's adopted an older child. And so you're like, are there wrong questions? Can I ask all the questions? They just don't know. And I think one thing I would love to see more in the Christian faith community is small groups, is people committing to their churches, not just going to church, but being a part of the church. And I think when you get into small group settings, when you can get to know people, we've exposed our children now to different races, different backgrounds, special needs children, so many different things, because we're in community together. And I think even as a church as a whole, we go to church, but we actually are the church, and we should be in community with each other, helping each other raise our kids, not being alone, not doing those things on our own. And fostering that small group community helps to break down those barriers and get you exposed to more than your own self.
So in this conversation, obviously we're focusing a lot of our attention on adoption, fostering, the questions that surround it all, and of course Heather's experience through it all. But something that won't be immediately obvious if you don't already know who Heather is that she has numerous hats that she wears on a given day. In addition to being a mother to 3 kids, who by the way are homeschooled with her husband, she also runs her own YouTube channel helping parents who are wanting to navigate the homeschool world. She's an author of a book, but also she's a COO of an 8-figure media company. Life for Heather, I would guess, is a constant challenge of trying to balance priorities and still meet deadlines, all the while staying present for her family. And so my question for her is, how does she actually conceptualize her purpose? What does she feel is the calling on her life?
I'll put this in a couple layers. The first calling on my life is to steward my children well. There are a lot of references for parents in the Bible, and they're not there just as footnotes. They are actual commissioned things that we're supposed to do.
Anything that stands out in particular for you?
Like teach your kids the way. Like, what about the idea of teaching them who? Like, let's go bigger picture. Teaching them who they are in Christ is probably my largest calling. I want them to know their identity in Christ. I want them to know that God has a call for their life, whatever that looks like, and it can go in many different ways. There's so many scriptures too about even just how we are supposed to be in community with each other. I want to teach my children how to serve others well. So many things. And so my first calling, I think, is to disciple the next generation. That's a huge calling.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What does that look like and what does that mean? Because I feel like you talk to any Christian,
Yeah.
and certainly any Christian parent, they're gonna say something like that. It's kind of like, who do you love first? I love Jesus, then I love mommy, and I love dad.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you learned that in school.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Right.
But like, what does that mean for you?
Yeah. And at 2 and 3, that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's where they are.
Yeah.
They need to know the hierarchy, that it's love God, love others, love your parent, love your family, love others. What it means now as we're getting into the more intellectual years of middle school and high school, it means that the number one priority in our family is teaching our children the word of God, the literal word. Like, let's open this Bible before we get to our history books, before we get to our math assignments, before we get to the other things that we think are important. Let's be in God's word. And that's really, really important to us. So we as a family put the call that God has on our family, which is to love others, love God and love others. So how can we do that first before the societal pressures of what we think we should be doing? So that's how that kind of looks. We homeschool, which is its own dynamic of what that looks like. You've gotten a little sliver picture of what that can look like. We actually haven't done any assignments since you've been around our family, but they're learning a ton, right? And so we do that through taking them out of the system, but exposing them to the world in a much bigger place. So yeah, kind of all that in a nutshell. My first calling is discipling them, putting them in good community. It's not just us either. It's putting good people around them. We are so blessed to have such a strong community of both men and women who love Jesus and who walk with Jesus, that just being the example that our kids are seeing on a regular basis is vitally important. So yeah, I think my first one is that. The larger call on my life, I think, is my mess is my message. I've struggled with self-confidence. I've struggled with not loving myself. And because I know who Christ is, and I know that he loves me, that I'm beautifully and wonderfully made in the image of God, that he has a plan for me, and it's not the plan for everyone else. I know him personally. Because of that, I want to bring freedom to other people. And so we do that through our company. In a covert way. We're not openly saying come to Christ, but what we are saying is, I have a skill that I know how to do. I will teach you this skill, and then we'll become friends along the journey. And at some point, you're going to hear that I love Jesus. And that's actually why I'm able to get on camera and run a business and love my husband well and somehow quote unquote do it all because of Christ, not because of me. It's not, I am not everything. He is everything. And I put my faith and hope and trust in that. And so, yeah, the call of my life is to help people. I define it now as find freedom. And that's just a broad, it's just broad in that it's find freedom in stepping outside of the norm, stepping outside of what everyone thinks you should be doing, and going after the gifts and talents that have been given to you.
One of the key takeaways that has been marinating in my mind throughout this entire conversation is what it really means to live by faith. I've always prided myself on being a man of faith, in being the kind of guy who's willing to quit his job and move all the way across the country because that's what I believe God was calling me to do. And when it comes to the idea of children, I'll have to admit, being a man of faith doesn't come so naturally. But seeing the faithfulness of God in Heather's family reminds me that God does have a plan. And even if I don't see how it's all going to work out, there is in fact value in trusting Him.
There's a song right now that I just play over and over and over. It's
Wanna
Wait on
sing
the
it for us?
Lord. Wait on the Lord. Yeah, come on. Wait. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's good.
yeah, by Maverick City?
Yes,
Yes,
it's so
it's a
good.
good one.
I listen to it every morning because God is a God of His own timing, not our timing.
Yeah.
And so we think in our society, you need to have kids between this age and this age, or you're too old, or all these things. He is a God of years.
Yeah.
He's not a God of days, And so for us, our kids might be a little bit older if our family grows. Now, caveat, I didn't even say that after Nathan, literally 2 months after him, my husband went and got a vasectomy.
Oh, okay.
So we're like, okay, well, if God's going to provide another kid, it's going to be a full-on miracle, right? However, 5 years later, Isaiah went in to get a test, and the doctor was like, hey, just so you know, you're actually still fertile.
Oh, wow.
And we were like, okay, God, like if it's for you, it's, but it may not be that. And He may say 3 is what you are, Heather, and that's fine. But I will trust in God's will for my family, not my own. And I think that I want more people to see that because yes, of course, big families are probably a lot harder. I don't know. I only have 3. More, bigger car, maybe a bigger house, more things. But God will provide. And I think the more and more we lean into just knowing that He is our provider, the more we can say, God, I trust you and I'm here for this journey, and YOLO. You only live one life. So let's do it,
I love that. And I just kind of want to comment for whichever cynic might be listening about the idea that God provides. It's like, okay, hold on. You just said that she's COO of an 8-figure business. It's like, yeah, but like, let's pause and rewind just 1 year. She had $12 in her bank account. $70 in her bank account. I don't know how I got 12.
Yeah.
$70 in your
12 sounds better. We can go that way. It's not truthful, but I mean, after we paid a bill, we had nothing. So
right.
yeah.
And so it's not as though that your journey hasn't required faith.
Oh, an enormous amount of faith. In all the things, in stepping out and saying, hey, honey, I'm going to start this business. By the way, I'm not getting paid to do any of it.
Right.
For being in debt, for quitting college, for so many things in our life for moving our family. So many things we'd had to say, God, is this what you want? And if it's not, close the door.
Yeah.
And we've seen Him. And I think that's what's so great about when you lean into God, He will show you the miracles, and He will show you as you get more and more and more into loving Him, you will just start to see, like He is peace.
Yeah.
So you'll start to see when it's not peaceful, okay, am I not in the right direction? Am I not aligned with what God has told me? Am I not aligned with what His word says? And you can dig into that and you're like, oh, I'm not. I was actually doing that out of pride, or I was doing that out of fear, or whatever that is. So the more and more you get comfortable in that. Now, am I still fearful? Yeah. I'm fearful every day because I'm raising 3 children, and what's going to happen? But God will be there no matter what, whether we are homeless or whether we live in a mansion, He will always be there.
I would love, as we're kind of closing this down, for you to paint me a picture of like, what are those, you talked about the moment where you were doing the snuggles and the reading and like that scent thing kicked in. Is there another moment that stands out in your mind where you're like, man, like this is family. This is what it's about.
Because we are with our children all the time through choice and through seeing it as a blessing, not as like, oh, we're with our kids. Like it's such a blessing. I feel blessed that I get those moments all the time. And so for me, it's not even just one. It's like, I think about only having 18 summers with our kids. I think about, and I think, gosh, he just turned 14. Like we're at 14. Oh my goodness. And that age scares me. But I just think, man, And then we get to go into adulthood, and then we get to be grandparents. We get to live this wonderful life that God's created. So it's not necessarily just like one moment, other than when we're just sitting there having dinner and jokes are happening, and they're just at such a fun age now where they're like asking deep theological questions at 9:00 at night, and I'm just tired, but I'm like, okay, God, I hear you. Like, I hear you, speak into them. And just seeing how our kids, they all get along, and not in a weird way. Of course they argue, they're brothers and sisters. Like there's tension, there's always that, but it's just so magical to see them grow into who God has them, who God wants them to be. And just getting to witness that to me is already a miracle.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's a lot of other things that you do that may or may not be relevant to people who end up listening to this episode.
Yeah.
If anyone's an aspiring YouTuber, there's a whole thing that you guys do. Can you give us the 411 on that?
Yeah, you can go to thinkmedia.com, and thinkmedia.com will direct you to our best resources. We run a YouTube channel, but actually what we do is education. I am so incredibly passionate about educating, and that looks like we help you get started. If you have a message that you want to get out there, we'll help you figure out how to do that with video, because video is one of the most powerful platforms that we have in the world right now. And so we'll help you do that. We'll help you with everything from the gear to the lighting to the what do you say on camera to the how do you get over yourself and get confident, all those things over at thinkmedia.com.
Awesome. And in full disclosure, this was the course that I took 6 years ago when I was like, YouTube, maybe.
And look at you now. Like, can I also say, I don't know if this is your first time listening to this, but the growth and even just the man that you've become through this, and just seeing your confidence grow, seeing what you're creating, being such a person who is putting out good things in the world. It's so encouraging to see that you stuck with it. And it's so cool that we get to be friends now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Those are very kind words. I appreciate it. And coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you so much. Check her out. Check out Think Media. You also have a homeschooling channel. If the whole story with the kids thing is something you want to pursue, there's that. We'll include links in the description below and all that kind of stuff.
Yay.
Also, you have a book coming out.
I do have a book coming out. Yeah. It's called YouTube Made Simple. It'll be out the first quarter of 2022. And it is to help you overcome fear, build confidence, and build a successful YouTube channel.
There you go.
Yeah.
Check it out if it's something you want.
Yay.
Awesome. If you've made it this far into the interview, I'm going to assume that you value the kinds of conversations that we're having here. This channel, this space on the internet is a tiny little nook for curious spirits like yourself. It's a channel that's dedicated to exploring the other side by sitting down and talking with someone whose life story is different than yours, with the intent of learning and understanding them better. The internet right now doesn't often reward this type of empathetic content. If you see any of the trending videos, it's the ones that cause people to fight, to bicker, and to debate that often rise to the top of the pile. And that's exactly why I want to say a huge thank you to our patrons, the ones who are enabling this channel to continue. Patreon, if you've never heard of it, is a goodwill machine. It's a way for viewers like yourself to partner with the kinds of creators that they feel are making a difference. You can pledge to support just a few dollars per episode and ensure that even shows like I'm Listening, which may never get millions of views, that they still have the funds to create the kind of content that you enjoy listening to. The perks for supporting, other than the satisfaction of having done a really kind and generous thing, do include access to full-length, unedited versions of every single episode. Like this episode right now, I did have to trim in order to make it as digestible as possible. You get the full thing at the Patreon website, but as well, you also get access to a private show called the Super Secret Podcast, where I basically share unfiltered thoughts on a given podcast. Patrons are the ones who enable this exact show. So if that's you, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.